Hi everybody. So today's lecture is going to help you with understanding MLA format and figuring out how to cite and use quotations in your essays. So first of all, some information about where you can get your sources. First, make sure that your sources are appropriate for the assignment. Remember that depending on the assignment, they might need to be scholarly peer-reviewed sources. And those are things that are from journal articles or a published book, or they might be able to be just reputable popular sources, and that's sources that come from things like national newspapers, .gov websites, and that kind of thing. So go ahead and check the directions for whichever essay you're writing, and it will let you know what type of sources you need to use for that particular essay. Sources that might be good places to start, but are not something that you should use for the end result in your essay are generally websites that are just sort of random websites, most encyclopedias like Wikipedia, blogs, satirical or highly biased sources. So those things might be a good place to start in terms of just getting an understanding of the issue, but generally they're not going to be something that you can cite in the finished essay. Remember that we use lots of sources in class, so you've already read and annotated lots of those, and it's completely fine to use any of those sources as long as they're relevant to the current assignment. And remember that you can always look at those by going to the past modules on Canvas. Another place to find sources are the databases. So for whichever campus you are at, you can find databases by going to the library's website. And I've written down directions for each of you depending on which campus you're at. So I'll go ahead and post this PowerPoint presentation so that you can see the step-by-step how to get to each of those. So one thing to remember once you have your sources that you plan on using is that there's a difference between quoting and paraphrasing. So remember that it's important to cite whether you're quoting or paraphrasing. The difference is that a direct quote is in quotations, and this is when you're using the exact words, word for word, from an outside source. A paraphrase is not in quotations, and this is what you get when you're just sort of summing up something that someone else has said. The place that students sometimes get into trouble is they think, well, since I've summarized it, that means that I don't need to introduce and cite this. But that's not true. Even if you're just summarizing something that somebody else has said, you still need to give that person credit. So it's important that you have a signal phrase and a citation, whether you're quoting directly or just paraphrasing. So keep that in mind. Another thing that you may or may not have heard me discuss so far in class is quote sandwiches. So this is just sort of a technique that I like to teach my students to help you guys deal with quotes. So anytime that you're using a quote, remember to kind of sandwich it into your paragraph. And a quote sandwich has all of these different parts, and this is basically going to be an entire paragraph that uses evidence in the middle. But by doing it this way, you introduce the quote, you don't forget to include citation, you don't forget to explain it, and that way your reader knows exactly why you're using the quote, your purpose is very clear, you avoid plagiarism because you're making sure to cite, and it helps you build nice, fully developed paragraphs as well. So I definitely recommend using this. So in a quote sandwich, the first thing that you see is the introductory info. This is where you tell readers things like who said the quotation or who is speaking. So this is where you're borrowing the information from. After that, you have the signal phrase, and remember that this includes a verb of some kind, like the author states or the author claims. Then you have the quote itself or the paraphrase. After that, you have a citation. So remember that we're citing an MLA for our class, which means that you've got the author's last name and a page number. And then you've got explanatory information. So this is your explanation of how that quote supports what you said in your topic sentence. So the idea here is that your whole paragraph works together to incorporate this quote in a way that makes sense, and to help readers understand, how this quote is helping you prove your point. So integrating sources is important. Along with using that quote sandwich method, one of the things that is really important to help sort of integrate those quotes seamlessly is a signal phrase. So verbs like these help readers anticipate that a quote is coming. So you can use any verb that makes sense for your purpose. So the author claims, states, argues, refutes, whatever. But make sure that you've got a verb there. Tell us what the author is doing with that quote. And make sure that you're using a signal phrase before your quote or your paraphrase every time. Once you get really comfortable with using quotes, if you want to switch things up a bit, but you're still giving the author credit, that's fine. But a lot of the time when you're just getting started or you're not quite, super comfortable with all of these things yet, it's just a good idea to use that quote sandwich method until you really get the hang of it on your own. And then you can start branching out and changing things. Once you have a signal phrase, make sure that you've got all of this relevant information being provided to your readers. So we should know who it is that you're quoting. Usually it's helpful if we know what kind of credibility that person has. We should know the title of the text that is being cited, and then we should also know the page number where that information comes from. So by the time you're done using your quote in that quote sandwich method, then all of this should be there. MLA citations make it easy to include most of this in a parenthetical citation, but some can be included in the signal phrase as well. So I've got an example here where I'm sort of sneaking this information in. So Stephen King, in his essay, Why We Crave Horror Movies, urges readers to consider the national obsession with this gruesome genre when he says, and then this would be the quote, and here's the citation. So you'll notice that in my introductory information before the quote, I've given my readers all of that information that they need, right? I've got the author, I'm citing an essay, I have the title, I have a signal phrase, and then here's the quote and the citation. So although it sounds like a lot, if you do it correctly, you can get all of this information in just before and right after your quote pretty easily. Remember that when you're discussing sources, you should never let your source speak for you. So it's really important to explain what readers should take away from any quotation or paraphrase that you use. So for instance, this could be part of the explanation following the Stephen King quote. So this would come right after the quotation. King's statement above demonstrates that people really are obsessed with horror movies, since his statistics show a majority of people who go to the movies prefer this genre above any other. Clearly, we do love being scared, and it seems, and then this paragraph actually went on for longer than that. So make sure that when you are using a quote, you're really explaining probably more than you think you need to about why that quote is there and what it shows us. Because quotes are subjective, right? We can all look at the same quote and come away from it with different understandings of what it means or why it's relevant. So it's important that in your essays, you make that very clear. What are you getting from this quote, and how does it support your point? Some quick information about citing articles, because most of the time in our class, you will be citing articles, scholarly journal articles, and things like that. So you'll be including the author's last name and a page number in parentheses right after the quote, but before punctuation. So Fujinami and then the number 25. If I had written something and you were quoting page 25, that's what that would look like. If you have multiple authors, include both authors. If there's more than two, you can include the last name of the first author plus et al. And then the page number. So for instance, Fujinami and Baldon, 27, or Fujinami et al., 27. What if there's no author? If there's not an author, then the first thing you need to do is make sure that your source is credible. And if it is okay to use and it is credible, then just use the first word of the title and the page number in parentheses. So let's say we had a source about human trafficking, then you might use the first word, trafficking, and then the page number. What do you do if there's no page number? This happens sometimes with online sources. So what I recommend is use a print preview function and use the number of the page where the quote would occur if it were printed. So then you'd have the author's last name and then the page number. So these are the most common things that I get asked about by my students when they're citing articles. But if anything else comes up that's not covered here, ask your group mates, ask a tutor, or ask me, and I'm happy to help you out with that. Citing everything else. So throughout the course, you'll definitely be citing lots of different types of sources, things like videos, books, TED Talks, all kinds of stuff. This site, the Owl at Purdue, is a really good source that helps you with citing all kinds of different things. And when I post this PowerPoint to Canvas, you'll be able to click on this link here and it'll take you there. Or you can just do a quick, Google search for it, and there's all kinds of citation help. Also, if you have a handbook that is required for your class, then you can look in that handbook and it has an entire section there. If you are in a class that doesn't require a handbook, this website has just as good information. And then, of course, you can always ask your group mates, a tutor, or myself for help. The writing centers that we have on each of the campuses that I teach at, and also libraries and the librarians, will also have all kinds of good information to help you. And their contact info is in the syllabus. Okay. All right, so that is, I'm getting Facebook notifications. So that is how to cite basically most of the stuff that you'll need to use for our purposes. As always, if you get stuck, feel free to reach out and ask for help, and happy citations.